Inside the heavily gilded staterooms of Buckingham Palace, the most exclusive political body in the United Kingdom gathered for an emergency meeting of the Privy Council. In less than 60 seconds, Queen Camilla's 30-year campaign to secure absolute institutional supremacy evaporated in front of the nation's highest-ranking ministers. What Camilla just realized, reportedly frozen in shock as the clerk of the council discreetly blocked her path to the sovereign's right hand, is that her proximity to the king does not equate to constitutional power. Instead of taking her anticipated seat at the head of the table, she was subjected to a cold, breathtakingly polite administrative humiliation. Escorted out through a secondary side door normally reserved for serving staff, she was forced to leave Prince William sitting directly opposite the king, staring down the very woman who thought she had successfully engineered a shadow regency. This is the story of how the Prince of Wales weaponized the ancient machinery of the British government to execute a flawless psychological defeat. We are going to unpack the secret shadow office Camilla attempted to establish at Clarence House, how a single administrative signature dismantled her entire plan, and the terrifying moment she realized she had been entirely stripped of her influence. By the end of this account, you will understand how the illusion of absolute power shatters when confronted by the cold, unyielding reality of the constitutional bloodline. This is a forensic look at how the palace uses the boring machinery of administrative protocol to turn a routine transition into a lethal weapon of containment, leaving the queen consort trapped in a state of profound vulnerability. To grasp the sheer magnitude of what happened in that room, we must first rebuild the towering fortress of influence Camilla spent 3 decades constructing. Following her eventual ascension to the throne, she operated under the comfortable delusion that her position was finally unassailable. She had played the ultimate long game, weathering decades of intense public scrutiny, carefully erasing the lingering institutional memory of Princess Diana, and elevating her non-royal family members into the glittering periphery of the crown. Her strategy was fundamentally based on the belief that controlling access to King Charles meant controlling the monarchy itself. For years, she acted as the primary gatekeeper, softly rearranging schedules, dictating who was granted private audiences, and wrapping herself in the absolute authority of the sovereign. She assumed that wearing the crown and sleeping in the palace granted her equity in the institution. This sense of supreme dominance reached a critical turning point in the early months of 2026, as King Charles required extended periods of quiet retreat to manage his health. A subtle but significant vacuum of power opened at the very top of the royal apparatus. Rather than stepping back to allow the constitutional heir to assume his rightful duties, Camilla's faction saw an opportunity for a staggering exploitation of the king's vulnerability. Behind the closed doors of Clarence House, she quietly attempted to establish what royal analysts describe as a shadow executive office. The plan was brilliantly bureaucratic and deeply ambitious. By leveraging her daily physical proximity to the king, she sought to manage the flow of internal royal documents, effectively reviewing and filtering non-constitutional decrees, palace appointments, and financial allocations before they ever reached the desk of the monarch. It was a stealth maneuver designed to solidify her as the unofficial regent, ensuring that her inner circle would dictate the daily operations of the monarchy while bypassing the Prince of Wales entirely. However, Camilla fundamentally misunderstood the forensic vigilance of the modern Prince of Wales. Prince William does not rule through emotion or public complaint. He rules through the exact boring machinery of estate management and constitutional law. His silent, enduring grief for his mother has forged him into a fierce, uncompromising protector of the crown and his wife, Catherine. He understands that the survival of the monarchy relies on absolute bloodline supremacy, not marital proximity. The discovery of Camilla's attempted power grab did not occur through a dramatic palace leak, but through the highly regulated channels of the Privy Council office. When the clerk of the council, the senior civil servant responsible for the legal flow of sovereign documents, noticed an irregular bottleneck of administrative paperwork originating from Clarence House. William was immediately briefed. The Prince of Wales recognized the strategy instantly. He saw that Camilla was using the mundane task of paper management to build a permanent fortress around the king, effectively isolating the sovereign from his own constitutional advisors and attempting to rewrite the institutional hierarchy. The retaliation orchestrated by Prince William was a masterclass in bloodless institutional warfare. He understood that engaging in a direct argument with his father or creating a media spectacle would only damage the crown and play into the hands of tabloid gossip. Instead, he utilized his authority as the Prince of Wales to enact a quiet, devastating correction within the rules of the Privy Council, working in total secrecy with the highest levels of the British civil service. A new protocol amendment was drafted regarding the flow of executive documents during periods of sovereign medical retreat. The rule was remarkably simple, but deeply lethal to Camilla's ambitions. It quietly stipulated that all internal administrative mandates, estate appointments, and discretionary budget approvals originating from the King's private office must now carry the mandatory co-signature of the Prince of Wales before they can be legally enacted. With a single stroke of a pen, the shadow office at Clarence House was rendered entirely powerless. William did not need to confront Camilla. He simply cut the administrative oxygen to her entire operation. He weaponized the system to protect Catherine's future and to honor the legacy of Diana, ensuring that the true power of the monarchy remained firmly within the grasp of the constitutional heirs. What looked like a routine administrative update was actually a total dismantling of her empire. That detail matters immensely because it shifted the ultimate authority over the royal ecosystem from the king's bedside directly into the hands of the future sovereign. The trap was set to snap shut during a highly anticipated emergency session of the Privy Council at Buckingham Palace. Camilla arrived at the meeting with the absolute confidence of a reigning matriarch. She expected to walk through the heavy mahogany doors, take the seat traditionally reserved for the sovereign's most trusted counselor, and project an image of shared supreme authority to the assembled cabinet ministers. She believed that her presence would validate her shadow regency and permanently cement her status as the untouchable power behind the throne. But as she approached the entrance of the council chamber, the invisible wall of protocol suddenly materialized with devastating precision. The clerk of the council stepped forward with practiced aristocratic deference. In a voice just loud enough for the surrounding senior courtiers to hear, he informed the queen consort that the security classifications of the day's agenda had been strictly updated under the newly enacted administrative protocols. Her presence, he politely explained, was not legally required, nor was her clearance authorized for the constitutional matters now solely managed by the King and the Prince of Wales. The moment was agonizingly silent. Camilla was not asked to leave. She was institutionally erased from the room. She was being told by a civil servant that her 30-year climb to the top of the royal hierarchy had fundamentally hit a brick wall. To compound the visual humiliation, the main corridor was already being secured for the arrival of the Prime Minister and the cabinet. Camilla could not simply turn around and walk back the way she came without causing a highly visible disruption and appearing entirely defeated in front of the government's elite. She was quietly directed by security personnel toward a secondary exit, a narrow side door traditionally utilized by the serving staff to bring in tea and silver. It was a forensic, symbolic demotion. As she walked down the dimly lit service corridor, her mind reeling from the immediate collapse of her grand strategy, the heavy oak doors of the council chamber closed firmly behind her. Inside that room, Prince William took his seat directly opposite his father, holding the absolute undeniable power of the bloodline. Camilla stood alone in the hallway, the distant murmur of the government operating perfectly without her echoing through the walls. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her careful maneuvering, her aggressive consolidation of favor, and her desperate attempts to control the king's twilight years had all been neutralized by a simple, lethal administrative mandate. She had reached for the ultimate lever of state power, only to discover that she was merely a temporary tenant in a kingdom, governed entirely by the son of the woman she had tried to erase. She was trapped on the outside, looking at a door she no longer had the authority to open, facing the terrifying dawn of a future where she controls absolutely nothing. The echo of the heavy oak doors closing at Buckingham Palace did not just signal the beginning of a Privy Council meeting. It sounded the death knell of Queen Camilla's 30-year public relations empire. Standing in the dimly lit service corridor, stripped of her executive access and her dignity, the terrifying reality of her situation began to crystallize. The illusion of absolute power she had projected to the world, the carefully curated image of a sovereign equal, had been completely dismantled by a single bloodless administrative maneuver. She was not defeated by a public scandal or a tabloid exposé. She was neutralized by the cold, boring, and utterly ruthless machinery of constitutional law, weaponized flawlessly by Prince William. As the meeting concluded and the ministers departed, Camilla retreated to her private quarters, waiting for King Charles. This was the moment she expected her husband, the man who had torn the royal family apart, to legitimize their relationship, to intervene. She reportedly demanded that the Prince of Wales's protocol amendment be instantly revoked. She sought a public correction, an assertion of the king's absolute authority over his son, and the immediate restoration of her shadow office at Clarence House. But what she received instead was the ultimate emotional betrayal. When she looked to King Charles for salvation, she was met with a heavy, devastating silence. King Charles is many things, but above all, he is a pragmatist who understands the fragile architecture of his own reign. Facing his own mortality, Charles knows that he is merely a transitional monarch. The future of the House of Windsor, its popularity and its stability, rests entirely on the shoulders of William and Catherine. Overturning a legally sound Privy Council protocol to indulge his wife's political ambitions would not just provoke a constitutional crisis, it would publicly expose the king's diminishing grip on the institution. Charles made the cold, calculated decision to look away. He chose the survival of the bloodline over the vanity of his wife. For Camilla, realizing that her absolute protector would not shield her when the institutional knives came out was a psychological death blow. That devastating silence from the king exposed the profound commercial desperation underlying Camilla's entire existence within the palace. It is incredibly easy to be blinded by the majesty of the royal standard and the glittering state dinners. The public sees the queen consort and assumes she possesses immense untouchable wealth and permanent privilege. But the forensic financial truth is staggering. Queen Camilla owns virtually nothing of the royal empire. The true economic engine of the monarchy, the billion-dollar Duchy of Cornwall, is entirely controlled by Prince William. It is William who funds the private and charitable endeavors of the heir, and it is the duchy that owns the very leases to the properties Charles and Camilla hold dearest. The new protocol amendment enacted through the Privy Council was not merely a political blockade, it was a financial chokehold. By requiring the Prince of Wales's co-signature on all internal administrative mandates and discretionary budget approvals, William effectively froze the payroll of Camilla's shadow court, her close friends, her private staff, and the strategic public relations consultants she had quietly hired to elevate. Her non-royal children now existed at the absolute mercy of William's pen. He did not need to fire them. He simply subjected their operational budgets to an institutional audit that Camilla could no longer bypass. Without the king's unilateral signature to fund her expansion, Camilla's bureaucratic empire collapsed overnight. She was forcefully reminded that she is in the coldest legal terms, a highly titled guest residing in properties managed by her stepson. While Prince William systematically dismantled the financial and administrative scaffolding of Camilla's operation, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, executed the visual and moral takeover. Catherine's power has always been her flawless understanding of visual symbolism and her uncomplaining sacrifice. She did not need to issue a statement regarding the Privy Council drama. Instead, she simply stepped into the institutional void. In the weeks following the administrative purge, Catherine's public appearances took on a renewed, undeniable authority. When she hosted diplomatic receptions, she did so not as a supporting player, but as the definitive matriarch of the future. This subtle shift in the visual hierarchy was punctuated by the weaponization of royal jewelry. Whenever Catherine steps into the light wearing Princess Diana's iconic sapphire engagement ring or the Cambridge lover's knot tiara, she is engaging in a deliberate institutional correction. It is a biological and symbolic claim to the legacy that Camilla spent 30 years trying to bury. Every time Catherine waves to the public, the ghost of Diana flashes in the light, dropping a psychological nuclear bomb on Camilla's carefully curated narrative. The visual contrast is devastating. On one side, a queen consort, who is escorted out of side doors, stripped of her executive clearance and forced to rely on a husband who cannot protect her. On the other side, a Princess of Wales who commands the absolute loyalty of the civil service, the adoration of the public and the full undeniable weight of the future. This new order is being strictly enforced by the old guard, most notably by Princess Anne. As the ultimate keeper of royal discipline, Anne has ensured that the new Privy Council protocols trickle down into every aspect of the royal diary. Working in tandem with William, Anne has rigidly applied traditional etiquette to isolate the queen consort. Camilla's solo engagements are tightly regulated, and her non-royal family members are no longer granted premium positioning at state events. What appears to the untrained eye as a sudden adherence to old-fashioned protocol is actually a strategic mechanism of containment. Anne and William have built an impenetrable invisible wall around the core monarchy, guaranteeing that the history books will record Camilla as a temporary occupant, rather than the founding matriarch of a new era. The story of the Privy Council purge will not be remembered for the specific wording of the protocol amendment. It will be remembered as the exact moment the illusion shattered. Camilla played a highly sophisticated 3-decade-long game of chess, maneuvering through scandals and public outrage to place a crown upon her own head. But she failed to realize that the institution survives not by indulgence, but by ruthlessly cutting away anything that threatens its permanent stability. She discovered too late that the final, winning move belonged to the son of the woman she tried to erase. When the final transition of the crown inevitably occurs, the world will not see a dramatic screaming confrontation. They will simply see a woman being quietly guided through a side door, entering a private vehicle, and driving away toward an isolated retirement. Meanwhile, William and Catherine will stand firmly at the center of the balcony, having reclaimed their family's legacy without ever raising their voices. The illusion of absolute power will vanish into the administrative archives forever. If you found this forensic dive into the hidden power dynamics of the royal family insightful, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts on Prince William's brilliant administrative strategy. And stay tuned as we continue to track the silent wars unfolding behind palace gates.